wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fuad Kassab.
They caught all the wild children and put them in zoos. They made them do sums and wear sensible shoes. They put them to bed at the wrong time of day and made them sit still when they wanted to play. They scrubbed them with soap and made them eat peas. They made them behave and say pardon and please. They took all their wisdom and wildness away. That's why there are none in the forest today. Jo, thanks for sharing that with me.
You're welcome.
I woke up to that message in my WhatsApp this morning from Jo. She knows I love this stuff, and I thought it would be nice to share it with you guys as well. Welcome to A Quirky Journey. This is your host, Fuad Kassab, yet again. And with me, yet again, is my best friend, Jo Whitten. Jo, hello.
Hello.
We will move on to our show with the amazing Jude.
Hello and welcome to this amazing podcast with Jude. I know it's going to be amazing because she is one of the best advocates for real food and whole food on the planet. And I've been helped so much by Jude over the past few years. We're really excited to have you here. Thank you, Jude, for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking, as I'm sure you can.
And so do we.
And I just think it's amazing that technology allows us to do more and more of this these days. So yeah. I'm all in, guys.
Welcome, Jude. I'm really excited to have you here. You've been really on my to-meet list for years now because of Jo. She keeps talking about you and she really idolizes you. Even though she acts so casually around you, she really loves you so much, and you've been so valuable to her in her life, and it's just an honor and a privilege for us to have you here on the show. So thank you so much for joining us.
That's very lovely, but it's like it's that that's a very lovely thing for you to say, but I think that one of the things, and I'm sure that you two are getting a taste of this as well now, and Jo, you was with the book before, but it's a real honour and a privilege for an author to be in people's homes and to play a part in someone else's life.
Yes.
And I think it is, isn't it, Jo? It's it's your readers, your listeners, they invite you into their life, and I think that in itself is an honour. So thank you very much. It's lovely, but I think that the honour and the privilege goes outward in a lot of other ways as for me being a part of things like this, which is so exciting.
We feel the same. It's a big family, isn't it? And we feel like we just keep meeting amazing family members we didn't know we had.
It is, but you know something else that I think is really interesting, and I'm a terrible tangent person as well. One of my talking about it's a family, I actually think it's more than a family, and I kind of look at it slightly differently. Mm-hmm. One of the books that was a major influence on me in my very early days is a book called Laurel's Kitchen, and it was published in the US. Do you know that one?
I'm trying to. I know the name.
I haven't heard of it.
Can't remember.
Okay, so it's published in the US, and that when I was living in the US, I came across it, and I think the copy I have is 1980, so I was probably there in the late 80s, living in the US, and it's okay. So a lot of its nutritional information is very dated now, like cholesterol and margarine and all that kind of crap. But, excuse me.
You said margarine. It's all right.
We'll forgive you.
But it's an amazing book. And there's this beautiful, beautiful essay at the beginning of it by Carol Flanders, I think her name is. And it's called The Work at Hand. And it's about a 10-page essay. And she talks then, and what she's talking about then is equally as relevant right now today in August 2017. Mm-hmm. And she talks about what everyone is doing is, or the task at hand or the work at hand is we're making a prototype of the world that we want in the place that we live. So let's just say, for example, that means it's important to me to buy my food as close as possible to the person who grows it. And that takes me a little bit extra working my kind of timetable each week or things like that. But it's like that's the prototype of the world that I want, where food is more locally accessible. But the thing that she talks about then is that as we all do this, as Fuad's doing that, his prototype, and you're doing your prototype, and each one of our listeners today are doing their prototype, at some point those circles start to overlap and we are building a brave new world. And I really love that we're not only creating a family, but we're creating a whole different picture of how we want the world to look like. And we're all doing it in our little bits, but at some point that's going to overlap and make a whole.
That's beautiful.
Jude, it's actually really... I started off the bat with this topic because this is for like a young fledgling like myself compared to you in this whole food world. And we'll probably get to how long you've been doing this work for and give people some perspective on you. But maybe what I'm seeing here is this is just really early beginnings for me personally. Jo's been doing this for longer than I have. I've been on the road with her for around 1.5 years or so. And what I'm noticing is this kind of emergence of what seems to be like a life mission or a path for me, which is spreading
that's beautiful.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And this is not something I expected. I didn't know that this is what happened in the human journey, that you actually get some kind of purpose that is drawn out as you walk the path itself. And what I'm seeing is this deeper connection with all the communities that we go around talking to and touching their lives with a message that's as simple as whole foods. And it's really surprising to me, and it also gives me momentum because it seems to be a confluence in the ideas out there at the moment. Like everyone's looking for this. Everyone's actually asking about this information. And even though it's so simple, it seems to be that there's a lot of education that's necessary. So I'm just really interested to see if this was similar to you, if this played out similarly to you, and how your experience has been.
Oh, I think it would be fair to say that I've always walked a whole food path, but I think to a degree that anybody that grew up in my era. So I'm 63, so I grew up in Perth in the 50s and the 60s, so late 50s, early 60s, and I think honestly, and I see this everywhere around Australia when I'm talking about this, women in my age bracket or people in male and female in my age bracket come up to me and say, oh, yeah, that was how it was like for me too. I think that was a whole food time. I think what happened in the late 60s in the US, probably the 70s in Australia, it's a little bit later coming to Australia, is we are having what we are seeing is the full ramifications of the industrialisation or the commodification of food, the way we grow it, the way we produce it, the way we sell it. And people talk about, printing presses as being, or the, steam engines as being really massively changing. But I think that what happened with the commodification of food in the 60s and the 70s has had such a totemic shift that I don't think people really fully understand the ramifications of it. So I think I did have very much a whole food early life. My mum is Italian, so it tells you food is a big deal in our family. And we grew food only by the very nature that that's what you had to do if you were going to have food. We didn't grow all of it, but we ate seasonally and locally, because, well, that was what you did. There were no other options, particularly in Perth, where you only had access to stuff that grew in Western Australia and in the lower half because there was no transport. The Nullarbor Plain was gravel. Train tracks were different gauges. So it was kind of fairly isolated in that sense. So we ate very seasonally, we ate very locally, we ate very well, we ate very simply. We had white sugar, we had white flour, and God forbid, everyone's quite fine. But that's kind of another discussion. There were a lot of things going on at that time, but I think we can probably talk about that a little bit later. What happened for me is I did what a lot of teenagers, I'm a hippie. I was absolutely a flower child. I'm a classic. I'm just a flower child. I did the hot flowers in my hair. I was a rebellious. I'm a child of the female revolution. Absolutely, totally. I'm very classically a product of that era. And I rebelled against what I thought, all those things. And I, at that time, so it would probably be 70s, 80s. Anyway, I was doing other things. I was being a kindergarten teacher and hating that, and I was being a fashion designer, which I had a very successful business for quite some time and loving that. But it didn't feed my soul, and I really wanted to work in food. But I didn't know whether I wanted to cook food and have a cafe or restaurant or the nutrition side. And I was really interested in food and healing. And my mum's a nurse, so there you go, the two things in my life, food and healing.
Yeah.
So at that time, I started studying nutrition part-time while I was in fashion. And I found it incredibly disconcerting and disappointing, and I understand that now. And I went to the US in the mid-'80s, and I went for a holiday. I went to New Orleans, which was a place that had always called to my soul. And the second day I was there, I was in a bookshop, and a book fell off a shelf in front of me, and it had just been published, and it was a book called Food and Healing by Anne-Marie Colbin. And that everybody should read that book. It is a absolutely definitive book of the whole, as WHOLE, and energy fields of wholeness and whole foods. Yes, some of it's slightly dated, but it was just like I knew as soon as I saw that book, I'm like, it just all downloaded. I just didn't want to do fashion anymore. I didn't continue on with nutrition because what I realized was it was really shallow. It was fractionalized. And I realized at that point that what I wanted to do was take the information that was out there and translate it into food. And this is where I still stand, and it's where I have stood since those 25, 26, probably 28 nearly years now. I want to be translating that information because the critical thing that I think we need to understand is everything starts with the food that we eat, everything that comes into or onto our body, what's in the air, what's in the water, and what's in the food. All of those things inform our physical body of what it's going to be and what it's going to do. And if you don't know how to translate, it's all very well, for example, to say, well, have quinoa. Well, if you don't know how to cook quinoa or make it into a porridge like has been suggested, and you do it and it's going to be revolting. Your kids are going to go puke. Your husband's going to go, yeah, I don't think so, sweetheart. And you've lost your opportunities. So I'm really interested in the area of translation of knowledge into the food we eat. But that doesn't discount that we're a spiritual body also, and I'm a deeply spiritual person. And I absolutely believe that we've got to nourish our physical being and our spiritual being, and when those two things are working, that's when you have the opportunity to have most optimum health. Oh, yeah. There you go. Sorry.
No, we could listen to you all day. You love her already, don't you, Fouad?
Yeah. speaking my language, because I find as well with my own life is that my own spiritual journey started unfolding when I got better and I started eating whole foods, like in earnest, because I went through a stage in my life when I moved to Australia in 2001, and that kept going until 2011 until I really started eating whole foods. And in that time, I'd sort of I had become like a complete atheist in my life, and I just was completely involved in the physical world and didn't really take any notice of my spiritual being or my essence as a spirit in life. And then that started changing as well in 2011 when I started eating whole foods. So now as my physical healing improves and my spiritual journey deepens, there's the two come together and they reinforce each other. But I find that within my journey of whole foods, I've changed minds from my early stage to what gave me healing, to sort of having like a larger picture of it. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is I've now simplified my learnings to just the message of whole food being at the root of personal and planetary healing. So, and that's to me is the ultimate and simplest message that I can give as an expression of my life, to tell people that if they ate whole foods, then they will heal, and the environment and their society will heal from that as well, and that becomes like a result of their lives. I'm just wondering, with you, did you experience much fluctuation in your thinking, and has your thinking sort of been honed over those years? And maybe give us a bit of a background of where you started and where you are now.
Okay, absolutely. And I think that that's part and parcel of the development of a being, perhaps, that while I was certainly rebelled, and I sometimes don't think when we're younger and when we rebel, can I say I love being older. I mind you, I would love to have a slightly younger body.
Yeah.
Even I'd be happy to have a 50-year-old body, but my 40-year-old body was pretty good. But I love being older. I love having seen a larger lay of the land. And it's like sometimes to know the place that you want to live, or for example, the belief you want to hold, you have to have looked at all the other places too. And I'm kind of getting to the point that I've done that. Not that I'm not still learning. I learn every day and I'm like, oh, wow, oh, cool. So I think it would be fair to say that. So my kind of, path onto the path that I'm on now started in the US. And I was a believer in the vegetarian diet. I kind of thought dairy was a little bit bad. I've never been a margarine girl. That just never sat well with me. I just thought that was just, wrong from the start. But I think what was happening for me, and I can't speak for everyone, but I do think it was a large part of the vegetarian movement of the 60s and the 70s, is I think it was the only way that we as a generation knew to say all is not well. And you had seen in the late 50s after the war this massive swing in the US towards the industrialization of farming, using a lot of products left over from the wars, and this war on nature. And I think that the vegetarian movement, so we had this extreme swing to the left, and then you had this extreme swing the other way. So I was very much a part of that. But what I saw over the ensuing years is that didn't always really sit well for me. And one of my second biggest influences for me was, and I guess there are three things that have really shaped my beliefs that I hold today. So the first was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. The second was Ayurveda. But as I saw more and more working with food, it's what I saw working and at play all the time. And very fundamentally, Ayurveda, from which Chinese 5-phase or 5-element, Tibetan medicine, Greek medicine, everything is taken from. It's all come from Ayurveda. And basically, it's the issue that we are that everything on the earth plane is formed of natural forces. So that's air, ether, fire, water, and earth. And your earthly body is formed of those forces as well. So that had a very large impact on me in the sense that we're all different. There's no one size that fits all. And macrobiotics is kind of, to a degree, taken from Ayurveda as well. And then later on, another third influence came that really made me question how I thought. And that was the work of Weston Price, which I know you'd both be very familiar with.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I think the thing that I love about the work of Weston Price is it's not the translation of Weston Price's work that you see out there all the time, but I read his book, Nutrition and Degeneration, which is a very old-fashioned book, very old-fashioned talk, but it just was fascinating in that it made sense to me, and to a degree, though not completely, really started ringing bells for me in similarity to how people used to grow up in the 50s and the 60s.
Yes.
And so those three things, plus working with people over many years and actually seeing what worked and understanding how the body works more, have really impacted me. So, yeah, those things, my views have changed really considerably. And now I have very clear thoughts on what I consider whole foods to be, or what I consider. I think what we're all doing is we're answering or we're asking a question. And that question is, what makes the food that we eat wholesome and healthy? Or you could use another word, nourishing, or whatever you want to call it, and what makes it ethical and sustainable. Because calling a diet vegetarian or vegan is absolutely no guarantee across the entire world and 20 million universes that what you're eating is ethical or sustainable. There are much deeper, much more fundamental issues that are involved. So, yes, I've changed considerably, I would say, in what I believe the answer to that question to be. And they're probably a lot simpler than I thought as well. Yeah.
it's funny how it's funny how as you go along you start to simplify more and more with your food. Like I found when I was first trying to do healthy eating, in inverted commas,
Yep.
it was very complicated.
Yep.
I was grinding grains with a stone grinder and soaking things and doing this and doing that, and I was spending all day cooking with 4 kids hanging off me. And, you know, when I even look back at my first cookbook compared to our second cookbook, the simplicity of the recipes, you know, they're so much more simple in the new book.
Yeah.
Less ingredients, simpler food. Amazing flavour. It's just like I've learnt that it's not all about fussing around and doing all the things.
It's not, but I think that's also a metaphor for life as well. I just think that I just think it's a gift growing older, honestly.
Yeah. I've said to Fawad before, in the last, couple of years, I feel like my life has simplified and I've gotten calmer, and it's like things just start to fall into place a bit more, maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
I really do think so. There's one thing you said, Fawad, though, that I think is really important. And what I'd like to do is if it's okay with you guys, I'd also just really like to talk about what I think those answers are. What makes whole food whole food?
Yeah, definitely.
But you said a really interesting thing, Fawad, and that's that as you've been eating whole foods, you found that your kind of spiritual journey started shifting as well. I see that all the time. You cannot bring it's like, how's the best way to describe it? Nature, the force of nature, whatever you want to call it, life force, spirit, nature, God, universe, I don't know. But whatever you want to call it, I tend to call it life force. Whatever you call it, when you are eating vegetables that are not fake vegetables, so they're not grown on chemicals and fractionalized soil and masses of water, so without the whole, or actually without very little a life force anyway. When you eat food that is grown in complex, rich soil that has the sun and the rain and it grows the way nature they're meant to grow, and they're vital with life force, you cannot touch that food or work with that food or eat that food and not be changed.
Absolutely. I have a writer that I love. His name is Stephen Harrod Buhner. And he has a saying, when you start eating the wild starts eating you.
I love it.
It's so true. But I agree with that. But I think it's also a lot subtler than that too. It's like, I really am a massive fan of Demeter biodynamic. And if I had access to that, I'd choose that any day over organic, because the life force in that food is absolutely palpable.
I think a lot of our listeners, and this is something we see on the road when we go and, for instance, do a demo of making hummus, and people say, "Can I use canned chickpeas?" And I tell them, yeah.
Oh, kindred spirits.
I said, look, there's no, like, if you took a chickpea out of that can and you planted it, you're not gonna get a plant growing unless it grows some cans of chickpeas, and then you're in for some good money in your life. But I think the illustration of the vital force within food, and tell people that we as living beings have to eat other living things too, and that's the way of life. This is how it always is. When we start eating dead food, it's going to affect us.
Oh, that is such a profound thing, and it comes into that question of ethicality and sustainability as well. That question of to eat is to kill at some point.
Yeah. And
it's where my views on vegetarianism changed, and I love the works of Wendell Berry as well, and Michael Pollan talks a lot about Wendell Berry, and I think Wendell Berry was said that to eat is to kill. When you start growing your own vegetables, even if you're eating vegetables, if you are going to be, and depending on the vegetables that you eat, you will be killing life. And I think for me, I grew up a Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I'm deeply spiritual, but not religious. And I think one of the great things that I got from my upbringing in that sense was that all life is sacred, and that food doesn't just grow from physical components. It grows from the miracle of planting the seed in the ground, and that there's a lot of gratitude to be had for the miracle that is food. But when you grow it, it will involve death at some point, death of snails, of the rats, of the possums, of the slaters, of the cluster caterpillars, of the bogworm caterpillars, the potato grubworm, you name it.
Yeah. Yesterday I planted an apple tree in my house, and I killed a worm. Doing that. Yeah. I used my shovel, and then there was a worm cut in half. I was like,
it's all life.
What happened? That's right.
It's all life, and that's why I'm a really big believer in gratitude, and respect for our food, and just that sense of gratitude for the food that we have.
Maybe we can clarify. I want to focus in on this point, and I also want to go after that back to your definition of whole food, because I think it's really important to lay that as a foundation for the rest of the conversation. But maybe we'll just talk a little bit about the ethics of eating animals, and this is something that's on a lot of people's mind at the moment because of that documentary on Netflix called What the Health, which was sort of
goodness.
You've heard about that. That's
I haven't heard about it. And, I just don't watch this stuff anymore.
No.
Honestly.
No.
It just annoys you so much, doesn't it?
I don't watch it anymore because I tell you one thing I have learnt, the prime thing I've learnt from in the last 6 years, I think, or 5 years, because that's where it seems to be all going a bit crazy, is that very often they're a lot like our world at the moment. They're not actually really true. They're actually somebody's business.
Yes.
They're actually someone who I can't think of the right way to say it because I don't want to offend anybody, but generally it's people that have got vested interest in a particular point of view, and a lot of their view quite sometimes is shallow. Now, people would say to me, well, you've got a business too, Jude, and you've got a vested interest. And yes, that's true, but so I don't know where I'm going with that except to say, look, I just don't bother watching these things anymore because it's just I've done a lot of those fights. I'm not interested in those anymore. I've done those battles so many times and over the years that I just don't want to do them again. I'd rather just put my effort into empowering people to get good results and to make the changes that will be effective for them in their life.
I think the whole sustainability, ethical sort of argument, like you say, I think they throw a lot of dirt in our faces with that. There's a lot of crazy stuff out there, and when you disagree, you're like this big bad, person. We've had a few comments on Instagram and Facebook and stuff of social media, and it's like you say, I'm past arguing now. I just feel like it's so common sense. Why can't you see it?
It's the currency of the world that we live in at the moment.
Yeah.
It seems to be, in no matter what issue you want to choose, is shallowness.
Yeah.
It's not thought out.
It's whatever the mainstream is following.
Well, it's like whatever you can get, maybe more clicks or something.
That's true. That's true.
The way we educate our children, the way we build our houses, it's very short-sighted. What I would say that concern me a lot about these things is that I had in my thought and it just went. No, this is not. They're not black and white. No. Very little in life is black and white.
Exactly.
And the older I get, the more that I see, it's not just. They're not just these black and white things. There are making decisions on what is ethical and what is sustainable is complex.
Very.
It takes a lot of scientific work and probably one of the best books I've come across. Well, I do love Leah Keith's book, which I know that you know.
Yes, yeah.
I love Leah Keith, The Vegetarian Myth, but probably the book that I found even more interesting is a book called Meat, A Benign Extravagance by Simon Fairley, I think.
I wrote that down last time you told me, and I still haven't managed to read it. I need to do that.
That's a massive book to read. But basically he goes through the whole, okay, if we're not going to be eating meat, how much land does it take to grow the kind? Because whether we like it or not, we're humans, so we've evolved with meat, and that's just sadly how it is. Mm-hmm. Some cultures are slightly different, but that's how we've evolved. And, if we need protein, well, not necessarily meat, but we need protein. And if we're going to be, nuts are the things that provide them. So how much land do we need to grow those nuts, etc.? Basically, in the end, going all through that, one of the things that he came up with, and I probably have to reread it again to be a little bit sharper with it because science is not my forte, but one of the things that he came up with is eating a small amount of meat that has existed within a closed-loop farming system is a far better use of our land than not eating it and not having access to the kind of nutrients that you get, particularly in animal fats, and that kind of thing, and that it is a benign extravagance. And it was kind of really 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, probably slightly favoured in the way of meat.
Yeah.
And I'm not supportive of a large meat diet.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. But I think small amounts provide humans, particularly the fats, and fish, provide us with they're very potent sources of nutrition for humans, and of which you don't need a lot. You get a lot of bang for your buck.
Yeah.
And
I think
also
it's underestimated the amount of waste that goes when an animal is slaughtered, and we're just eating the prime cuts, and no one else is eating all the bones and the organs as well. And I think there's a huge room for adding that into our diet without contributing any additional burden to the meat system.
Yeah.
It's look, it certainly means we're not going to be able to eat meat in the way that we have ate it in the past. But in a sense, it's very much how we ate meat when I was growing up. We didn't have it all the time. We never had chicken.
But Jude, also what it worries me as well, because we've got quite often, if we're not in Australia, for instance, we don't grain feed our animals as intensively as they do in America, and that means that we're using pasture lands, and we're eating animals that are growing on pasture, which come from the grasses grow from the energy of the sun and the carbon in the atmosphere, and the animals essentially become a biomass of a sustainable energy to eat those. But then if we're saying that we're going to be eating a lot more vegetables and meats, and the current trends and the majority of more vegetables and fruit, and the current trends in vegetable and fruit farming is monocropping, that is contributing massively to the destruction of the soil, so that kind of sustainability issue is going both ways, and we can't just say let's eat more vegetables.
It's exactly right. And if you're eating vegetables, if ethicality is your stand and you're eating vegetables, then you really want them to be organic or biodynamic, or else the destruction to the ecosystem and to life. And I guess that's where, for me, I just think all life is sacred. It's no difference to me. And so if we're discussing the issue of ethicality, then there's definitely issues of ethicality with vegetables and fruit that we eat as well, and fish. You don't want to be eating farmed fish if ethicality is your thing.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Jude, maybe give us this. I'm really keen to understand your perspective on whole foods and what you currently define it as. Okay.
So this is, for me, this is where this is where I am today after many years, and these are what I would call nourishing foundations, and I think this is what makes up whole food. So number one, the soil matters. So they're all like no-brainers. They're all really common sense. So your soil matters. Everything starts in your soil. It's just tragic what's happening to our soil and what we're allowing to happen to our soil today. The food that you eat, or the animal product that you eat, is only going to be as good as the soil in which everything grows. Thus, I am a really big supporter of organic or biodynamic farming systems, particularly biodynamic farming systems, but I absolutely acknowledge that we will be starting to call them different things like beyond organics or whatever, but farming in those kind of ways makes a big difference to the soil. Number two, whole, natural and unrefined matters. So what this means is that we want as little that is edible on a food removed and as little that is inedible added back. So, for example, milk, fat is a component of milk. It's edible. We don't want to remove that. It's there for a very good reason. I like to say nature hasn't stuffed up and we've just really caught her out because we're so clever. By putting fat into milk, it's there for a very good reason. And the inedible bits that we add back for example, are the wealth of additives. And I have to tell you, additives are not my forte. I'm interested in food before additives, but I can tell you every time I listen to someone like Julie Edie, who I love, I just think she's awesome. Julie, I think I'm ungobsmackable, but every time I listen to Julie, I'm like, are you kidding me that this is what they're doing now? It's like it just defies common sense. So that's the inedible part. So and the husk on grain, we remove that because it's inedible. So whole, natural, and unrefined matters. The other thing about that point is the point of the synergistic whole. And I always refer to holistic with a W, which spell check always wants to change to HOLIST, but it's the whole. And generally when food is left whole, the components that are needed for things to work or to be optimally bioavailable or assimilatable in that food are generally there. You cannot break it apart and reform them with some of those bits. You've destroyed the life force. It will no longer work. So, for example, fat in milk is there because you need fat to digest the protein, but it's also there because it has your critical fat-soluble vitamins D and A that are only available in animal products. You don't get DNA anywhere else. And you might get beta-carotenes that have to be formed into vitamin A, which is not a very poor conversion anyway, but you're not going to get those two things anywhere else. And you need those two things to absorb the minerals that are in milk. So it's like, the synergistic whole. Number 3, having good gut ecology matters. It's really critical, particularly for how we digest two foods. And those foods are some of the proteins we find in nature, particularly gluten, and casein in dairy. And it's only been very recently that people are having problems with this. And it's pretty much exactly about the same time that you see the westernization or the industrialization or the massive commodification of our entire food supply, use of antibiotics massively in our food supplies, our obsession with cleanliness and antibiotic wipes and all sorts of things. And stress is another issue there.
Yep. I just have to butt in here and say that Jude is the one that got me onto the GAPS diet. So I'm very, very thankful for her constantly talking about gut health. Whenever I thought of gut health and needed help with it, I just went straight to Jude and she said, GAPS. So thank you, Jude.
Not everybody has to go that path.
No,
but for you, not. That was where you can't start healing anything else till you get that bit right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and I love what you're doing in that area.
Thank you.
Okay, eating food that matches you matters. So Ayurvedically, so we are part of nature as well. Our earthly body is formed of natural forces, and generally those natural forces are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and generally those body types, you're generally predominantly one with a subdosha. And I'm very Vata. I'm a poster child Vata. I eat a lot. I like my food warm. I like it wet. I like it rich. I really dislike anything cold. I won't even have ice water in summer, and it's got to be a really hot day for me to have ice cream or an icy pole. And that's just a very Vata. Whereas my daughter's very Kapha. She's much more grounded than me. I'm so not grounded. I have to work on that. I'm air and ether. Kapha is water and earth, a little bit bigger body. If she doesn't eat when she first gets up, it's not the end of the world. If I don't eat when I first get up, it's a tragedy of mammoth proportions for the whole of the day.
Is this sounding familiar for one?
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
and she likes drier, crispy food. She likes it less rich. She's got a slower metabolism. I've got a fast metabolism. And it is a recognition that one size does not fit all. And if I had to say, I always, 99 or say 96% of the time, see Ayurveda at play in what is going on for someone. And it's something that I believe needs, I'm not an Ayurvedic groupie. I don't slavishly follow it, and I don't recommend people do that. But if you can get a handle on that, it makes a big difference. So eating food that matches you, animal fats matter. Animal fats, including fish, so like eggs, marrow, offal, fat, skin, are just like that miracle thing where you get the most critical nutrients for humans. You get cholesterol, you get the fat-soluble vitamins A and D, you get fully formed omega-3 derivatives. So, you can eat all the chia you like. You can eat, which is not good thing to do. You can eat all the kale you like or leafy green veggies. But if you think you're going to, and you are getting omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid, but you're only actually getting it in its base version. The things that are really important in omega-3 is the derivatives that are formed from those things, DHA and EPA, and of those, DHA is the more important. They're all fully formed in eggs and in all those fats. The animal has done it for you. So they're just incredibly, you don't need a lot. You only need a little, but you need some. And then I would say, so I'm nearly at the end of it, sweetness is not a dirty word. And I think that some wholesome sweetness in a balanced diet is not a bad thing. And as I might have mentioned before, I grew up with white sugar and white flour, as did my mum and my mum's generation. And my mum's generation, my mum's now 97, and arguably her generation has most of them have had hard and long lives. You see the old guys still walking the whole walk most of the time in the Anzac Day, and a lot of mum's cohorts died in their 90s. My mum still lives at home. By herself, she cooks. She's not as good as she used to be, but it's very typical of her generation. And I think that my last one is probably what I am coming to believe to be the most important. And I think that is the context of your life matters, and this is stress. Mm. I think that I've got a very favourite nutritionist who's an old school nutritionist, Marion Nestle. And so she's an old school nutritionist, and she's got a great quote where she says, you can't take the nutrients out of the context of the food, and you can't take the food out of the context of, how you're eating it. Are you sitting? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you walking? And who are you eating it with? Yep. And I think that the biggest issue, the context of your life matters, and the level of stress in your life makes a massive, massive, massive difference. It will alter your digestion. It will compromise your digestion. It will create hormones in your body that are not conducive to good health. And when I look at how I grew up, I think that probably what I see as one of the the really glaring things that they did really right, their soil was better. Food was eaten in season because that was the only way you had it, and local, so it had a lot more life force to it. If it was preserved, bottled, dried, fermented. But we actually had designated times in society that were accepted that you stopped. So, for example, fathers stopped work and came home at 5:30. They ate with the family. Weekends, my dad didn't work. It was family time. Yeah. On Sunday, it was accepted within society that on one day of the week you stopped. You went for a picnic. You had a family lunch. We went to church. We came home. We'd have roast, or we'd have barbecue in summer, or picnic in spring. Yeah. We stopped and we functioned as a family.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen. Or if it does, it's very rare these days.
Yeah.
So that's what I consider. And I also think the final thing I'd say, that deliciousness is a nutrient in its own right.
I love that.
And we have to consider that the soul has there are two things that you can't survive with. The physical body must have food. It's the base of Maslow's hierarchy of need. The spiritual body needs love and deliciousness and joy. And without that, I would argue that you don't survive either. And there's many cases, studies of children when they're very little, when they don't receive, love and touch and deliciousness in whatever way you want to call it. Mm-hmm. They're both critical. To me, they are the foundations that form what whole food eating is. So if you want to eat some raw when it's seasonally appropriate and your digestion is up to it, go for it. But it's probably not going to be appropriate if you live in Norway in winter or you live in the Blue Mountains in winter. Your body's going to require more fuel. It's not a black and white thing. Mm-hmm. So that's, you kind of extrapolate from that.
I love how you tied in the human being to your definition of whole food, rather than just looking at the food itself, which is really, that's something for me to think about as well, to also have a larger view of it rather than what it is, the food itself. Over the past year or so, I've come to sort of have this belief that we have one sickness in our world, which is that of amnesia and of forgetting who we are as human beings living on an alive planet, which provides us with everything that we need, but we've kind of forgotten who we are as people, as children of the earth. And then from there, we've created these societies that end up alienating themselves and their children from nature and creating things like monocropping and mines and polluting the water and the air and industrialized food systems. And that creates... Yeah. And then from there, we see like individual sickness taking place in whatever form it is, whether it's autoimmune or diabetes or heart disease or cancer, that all these things are stemming from that amnesia that we're seeing. And I think part of the reason why we're driven to talk about whole foods is to wake people up to the fact that this is what you should be eating as a human being and taking them back to their heritage as human beings who live on this planet. Now, are we truly making a difference? I'm just wondering this now, because it seems that as you feel that there's momentum growing, all of a sudden you start seeing like fissures in the whole food world, and vegans against vegetarians against omnivores and all that. And for someone who's been doing this for as long as you have, maybe you can give us a bit of an idea of what we're facing now, and if maybe your impressions on where we're going. And is there hope, really?
My daughter always said, Nessie always says to me, she said, Mum, chill out. She said, freak people out. I have to say that I'm a really big believer in that we work on what we believe in and that those circles connect. And that we form the whole and the brave new world that we want. But I have to say, and that I think that's all we can do. There's nothing, that's all we can do. But I am often reminded that it's very easy for us working in this area to, when we go to do a seminar or classes or talk, you've got to remember that the people are coming there at least somewhat interested. Mm-hmm. But then I see the rest of the world and go out to the rest of the world, like if I'm at Coles to get toilet paper or stuff like that, or Woolies, or to get those kind of things. Really, I honestly, if you want my honest truth, I think that's probably tops about, well, I think I'm being generous to say that's 20% of Australia. Mm. And I think what I see, I don't think it's just food, unfortunately. I think, I know my mum really despairs at what she sees. I'm sure that the older generation despaired when they saw the hippie movement and the female revolution, and we have to think that humans are evolving. But I certainly find myself, I'm trying to be very measured here, I find myself concerned with what I see as, in every way. I look at kindergarten teaching where, it's just this focus on intellectual development and nothing else, and daycare from very early ages, and anything that's not intellectually based is is frowned upon. I'm concerned at the shallow and ignorance that I see in so many things. Like, for example, I just say once again that I think this idea of a raw food diet is just so, when you really, even if my cat looked at it, it's just so, it has nothing to any common sense or any shred of history in humans to give it any relevance whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's like we are not making good decisions as a society right now. And I think that whether that be in our food and the fissures that we're seeing in the whole food world, and that word just being used on everything, from the television that's been made, from houses that we're building, but everywhere you see there are really good things happening as well. There's little prototypes, and I think for me now, I don't have the energy to fight. I fought those battles years ago. I fought hard against the GMO battle in Western Australia. I really fought hard. That took a lot of energy. And in the end, what happened is just devastating.
Yeah.
But I've done a lot of those battles, and I just don't have the energy to do it. So what I want to do is just to affect change and say people, well, don't worry so much about all these things that you see out there and telling you yes to do, and that have all these Facebook pages filled with all these different pages that you follow saying you're a bad mum if you don't have a raw food, like bar or a Nirvana lunchbox, or you've got an Instagram feed where you're holding up a mug with all this stuff frothing out of it. I'm like, you'll be fine with any of those things.
Smoothie bowls and
on this really
raw kale
simple
smoothies.
Exactly. Don't get me started on a
I know.
I just think that in every area of life that we have lost the lessons that humanity has learned in the past. And I don't know, Fuad, but perhaps humanity is doomed to just relearn these lessons over and over again, because have we learned nothing after all the wars that we've been through? They just still seem to go on.
Yeah.
My mum looks at everything that she fought for, and that she saw during the war. Like, for example, my mum was a nurse, and her good friend were the nurses that were killed in Singapore. That's not an easy thing to go through.
Wow.
That were lined up on the beaches and killed. Wow. That's not an easy thing to go through. And everything that she sees that they fought for, she believes now is being kind of thrown away. And I don't know, I think perhaps all we can do is fight the good fight when we have the energy for it. And you two are younger than me now, and I think the good fight has to be fought, definitely. But we also have to, at the same time, say to someone, this is how you can do it. Don't get too stressed out about this.
Yeah.
But here's a way to do it. And they go, yeah, I can do that. I can make that change. And bit by bit, the circles get a little bit bigger.
Yeah. There was something that I was thinking about a few weeks ago, that I'm not a very good fighter. I'm very quiet sort of a person, and I don't find it easy to, like you said, it takes a lot of energy to to fight these things and to get out there. And there's some people that are really good at that. But, you know, I was thinking about, because sometimes I feel a little bit like, well, a little bit inadequate because I don't speak up as much as maybe I should. And I thought, you know, really, thought came into my head of quiet persistence. And I thought, really, that's where I feel that's my job, that's the way I do things, is I just keep plugging away quietly in my own little way, showing how people can change small things.
It's not for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, everyone, if there's anything I've learned in life, you can't be everything.
You can't.
You're you. And you work out your strengths and you work to them. And
even that does make a difference in the end. Like you said, you're widening those circles. Your circles are touching other people, other people's circles, and that's a really good analogy. And I felt, you know, I felt very settled once I thought about that. I thought, I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. It's different for everybody. It so is. It absolutely is. And you've got to work to your strengths, and there's a lot to be said for quiet persistence as well. Yeah.
Wow, this is it's pretty emotional for me to be having this conversation, really, because it kind of makes me examine everything that I do, and also to see where I am with people such as yourself, Jude, who have really this torch for so long, and to see that perhaps this is in my future too, to be like, I don't know, in 30 years having a conversation with some young people, you know, who are starting this journey as well, and to sort of give me hope. Hey, maybe I'll just ask a few practical questions and get your perspective on them. Yep. When people are making the move to whole foods and they've come from, say, an industrialized food system where milk costs $1 and you know, eggs cost nothing, and they just want to start eating healthier, and their budget is still not ready for organics or anything like that. What are your thoughts about like vegetables and meat and things like that from a supermarket?
Okay.
And how would you guide people to make that transition?
The way I do guide people to that is that I say to them, and I believe in, that you want to get your food and encourage people to get your food as close as possible to the person who grows it. Mm. So that's going to reduce your food costs massively. I think the issue of cost is a little bit deceptive. Yeah. There are other things in reducing food costs as well. So number one, buy your food. So we're kind of going around the issue in answering your question, but buy your food as close as possible to the person who grows it. Now, that takes a little bit of time, but it is doable. And you'll be surprised at the things you'll unearth. So, for example, when I moved last year, I've lived all my life in a city, and I've moved an hour and about 15 minutes out of the city to the Swan Valley. Had no idea where to get anything. It was really hard. But over a period of about 8 months, in the end, I've just discovered the most amazing things. Like there's a little local food hub 20 minutes down the road on a Saturday morning that where Jane and Peter, it's Peter's parents' house, and it's on the Helena River, and he grows vegetables on the river flats down there, and they're organic, and they're cheap as anything. But whenever you buy direct from the person who grows it, not what they're going to a market and buying, but what they're growing, it's much cheaper. Mm. So I'd say that. Number two, don't buy anything in packets. Mm. Every time you buy things in packets, you'll pay 2, 3, 4 times the cost. So, you know, I know, Joe, you're a big fan of Source Whole Foods. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Source Whole Foods. Buy from a bulk bin, or if you can form a co-op and buy even bigger and buy from the wholesaler in bulk. It's definitely, there are ways around it. Buy in season. Any food, organic, when it's in season, is cheaper. Sometimes I see them cheaper than conventional. Mm. So, but it takes a little bit of working out what's in season, and that's an area that I'm focusing heavily on the moment. Is what's in season. You know, like on my Instagram or Facebook or my newsletter. It's certainly in the online program that's coming.
That's good.
But so that's where I'd start. The second thing I'd say when you're talking about when they're looking at their budget, I would say put your organic budget to the things that really matter, and the things that really matter are animals. So your animal fat, the animals that you eat, and reduce your food costs elsewhere. Reduce the meat that you eat, and get good meat, and things, for example, like eggs. So good eggs in Perth, where I live, are going to cost $9.95 to $10.95. Yet I can extend the value of those eggs with vegetables in a frittata or a fritter, and it's incredibly cheap that way. So I extend the value of them. Butter, milk, meat, offal, I think all those things should be organic, and that's where you put your budget to, and you reduce your food costs in other ways, like legume and whole grain meals are ridiculously cheap. You can, when you're buying vegetables in season and as close as possible to the farmer, they can be cheap. I'm a big fan of growing your own veggies. And in this, I'm also aware that people listening to this, because this is what people tell me, and also I'm focusing on in the new online program, but it's this like, you've got to be kidding me. It's a nightmare just shopping. And, yeah, it is. And I'm segueing a little bit, or going on a tangent a little bit, because the whole food journey is not a journey that happens in 6 months.
No.
It might be 2 to 5 years, and it might take you a year just to work out where you're shopping.
Yeah.
And you know what? The other thing, I'm tangenting again, you do the best you can, and then you just give yourself a pat in the back and let go. Yeah. Because some days it's not going to be what you want, and other days it will. It takes time. So with meat, before I finish though, with meat, what I would encourage you to do with meat is I never, or rarely as possible, would buy anything cut up. So if you're a family, I would be saying get a half a sheep or a quarter of a cow or something like that.
Definitely.
It's far cheaper. Use cheaper cuts of meat if you're not doing it that way. Like, well, we're coming out of that season now for braisers and things like neck. I could make a meal that would feed 6 with lamb neck, and the lamb neck would cost me $6.50.
Yep.
So there's lots of, it's not just a one thing, but I would say, yes, put your organic money to anything from an animal. Like chicken, I would never, a good chicken for me is going to cost me about $28. I would never, ever buy chicken cut up. Any time you have anybody involved in touching a food, scooping it out to put it in a packet, or cutting something into a smaller bit, you're paying their wages, their workers' compensation, their superannuation, their insurance, the rent for the premises they're in. Yeah, so that's my advice.
Yeah, I really, because first it's really hard to find truly organic free-range chicken. I mean, that whole industry is such a crazy one.
Depends
right,
what
okay.
You're in. That's the issue. And this is the thing with Australia, and this is the thing, well, really anywhere really in the world, is when you do programs and stuff, is that food is it's very different in every state. And what chicken, ethically raised chicken you've got access to is very different. New South Wales is very good. Western Australia is very good. What we don't do well in Western Australia is pork.
I have pork local. Woo.
See, and that's the thing you have. You do dairy very well in Queensland as well.
I've got the local organic dairy.
Yeah, amazing cheese. Victoria does dairy exceptionally well.
Yeah,
West Australia doesn't. So there's kind of swings and roundabouts. So there are some things I just don't have access to or use.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think here for us, it's much easier to find lamb and beef in New South Wales than to find good quality pork. There's just a few brands of pork that I can recognize and go, yeah, well, this one's all right. But I still find it, anytime there's been feed involved with animals and they're not grown in a holistic way, like what I mean by that is there's new way of growing animals, which is actually not new, but new to our way of living. which is where they rotate the lands that the animals are living in, and they take them from one plot to the other, and then they go from the chicken to the pigs to the cattle. And then from there, they create like a closed loop of energy where the animals are feeding each other. But these kinds of ways of farming are very hard to find these days.
Very hard to find.
They're emerging. So there's more and more of them.
And it's definitely growing as well. But it's like, that's what, we're not going to be eating. There's not masses of meat available out there. It's there. And it's a lot more expensive. So we reduce that, our reliance on that. There's lots of other ways that we can nourish ourselves. I mean, when I say I'm supportive of meat, it's like we're not eating meat all the time, but it's still got a very valid place in a diet. But it's not sustainable to be eating lots of it.
Jude, what are you eating today? Can you let us know?
What I'm eating today?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm flying out on Wednesday, so that's a really good point, because but having said that, I think for lunch, what I've got for lunch is I usually go to the market on a Saturday morning and go a little bit nuts when I get home. And I've got in the fridge, I made a simple soup. So the other day I'd got stock done. I try and do it every 6 weeks. So I've done a simple, because it's so quick and easy to do. And I've still got some in the fridge. It's a chicken stock that I chuck some amaranth into that I didn't soak because it was a second, bit of a spur of the moment. I managed to get glorious carrots. Carrots are hard in Western Australia, so my little grower is just cropping some. I've got carrots in it, so longer cooking veggie, and then I've got silver beet in it, and I'll put some broccoli and peas into it when I heat it up again. And it's got coconut milk in it and fish stock and coriander, because I've got masses of coriander in the garden. So I'm going to have that for lunch. But when I get off this talk, I'll probably have a little. So I usually have an eggy breakfast. And this morning I had, because silver beet is just massively in season and cheap, I had ghee, mushroom, silver beet, coriander, goat cheese and egg.
Yum.
I try not to have carb in the morning, just because I try and reduce my reliance on a little bit, because to tell you the truth, right now, how I really like to have my wood-fired sourdough bread is as a toasted cheese sandwich with Gruyere cheese chutney. So it's like, and it's been really quite a cold winter here, and still is a bit cold, but so I've had that for breakfast. I've been developing a recipe which is pretty well finished now, and I've got a cookie to have, which is like a banana chopped chip cookie, which I'll have when I get off, and then I'll have that. For dinner, what I did put together on the weekend was I had some of that sustainable chicken in the fridge. So what I tend to do when I get my chicken is I get it fresh, and that means I can cut it into smaller portions and I can use the carcass for stock. So with the portions that I had sitting in the fridge from a while ago, I thought, that needs using. So I actually did a musselman chicken curry, which actually doesn't have that much chicken in it, because it really was not much chicken, I realised. But it's got lots of lovely veggies in it. And I'll add the lighter veggies, which at the moment are broccoli and snow pea, into that. So that's what I'm having for dinner.
You love cooking, right? By the sounds of it, look, this is something that you're.
I love eating. I think, to the point.
But what about people like I think we look back at what's happened in the past 20, 30 years and how it used to be the female's job to cook it in the home, and then it was sort of we were told that we should be eating takeaway food or food from supermarkets, and then that skill and art was lost, and with it the love of cooking has kind of disappeared. And then through things like, I don't know, for better or worse, shows like MasterChef started rekindling people's relationship with food and seeing that, it's something that they can enjoy. But we still see a lot of people who maybe still have some subconscious attitudes towards cooking and believe that it's not something that they know or love to do or wanting to do it at all. But now they're forced in that situation where they have to cook for their families and no one's taught them how to do it. And they're just in a hate-hate relationship with this thing that, to me is the most beautiful thing that you could be doing with the life force that the universe gives to you. What kind of advice do you have for them to maybe find a way to love this and to start taking it on board?
Such a great question, because you, Fuad, love cooking. I love cooking, but I have to tell you, I'll let you in on a secret, everybody. I don't love cooking all the time. And when your kids are younger, it's a thankless, relentless dinner beast that demands to be fed every single night. And when you've done it, you spend all this time cooking and it's all eaten, there's nothing left. It's like,
what?
Can't say it. I'm like, God, I've got to do it all again. So it's actually not always this really lovely thing that a lot of places make it out to be. It is the way I get around it is that I will reinforce to you, dear listener, that what it is your basic need. If you want to be well, and we want to be well so we can feel good and live a life. And I loved that you did a Insta post or something, Joe, I can't remember, where you talked about why we want to be healthy and well. Yeah. And it's like, if you want this, then you have to provide your body with the things that make it well. And some of those things that make it well, one of the things that make it well is appropriate foodstuffs. But secondly, the other really important thing, and I think this is something that's massively lost at the moment, is you have got to build in deliciousness to the week as well, because your body, particularly in winter, perhaps more your spirit, has a really quite high requirement for deliciousness.
Comfort
doesn't
food.
Mean it does, and it's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And once that need is met, it's fine. Denial is far worse, but that's another topic for another day. So for me, I strategize myself around it. Now, one of the things, and if I can talk about it, one of the things, so I'm finally going online. It's just, talk about bigger than Ben-Hur.
I want you to talk about it. Sorry, we haven't got to that yet.
It's getting too much for me and doing classes and organising infrastructure interstate. I want to be at home more. I want to be around. My daughter's just bought a house. I'm so excited.
Oh, that's so cool.
And but anyway, I digress, which I do often. So where I'm starting with my online class is I'm starting on the program called Get Organised for the Week Ahead, and it's coming out in mid-October. But the thing that I will say is, it's about strategizing yourself around it so you make the week easier. But the thing that I would always start off with is like, this is something that you're going to have to do. Now, I'm sure this happens in other states, but in Perth, I don't have an option to buy the kind of food I want to eat. It would cost an arm and a leg, literally it would. And food is more expensive here than any other state in Australia, and dare I say it, in the world. I'm not joking.
Wow.
It's one of the most expensive places to eat in the world. And I want to eat that kind of food because as soon as I stop eating that kind of food, I notice the difference in how my body and mind function. So I'm going to have to do it. So I have to strategize myself around that. But the second thing is I have to do it so I stop fighting it. So for me, there are some things that are really critically important. I think my workspace is not always clear, but I try and keep it clear, and I have a big board, so I've got a nice big clear space. My knives are sharp. I've got good cookware, which makes a huge difference. but
Does.
I include beauty. That's really critical for me. So I've usually got flowers. They might just be whatever's in the garden, and or frondage or herbage or something, but I need to have some beauty, and I try and bring some grace to that space. Now, I'm not always successful at it, and I have a lot of strategies up my sleeve, so like menu planning and how I strategize that menu planning, and things like loving myself. So I at least do portions of things at when I've got time. So I've got the silver bit sweated down so I can just turn that into something else during the week. Lots of strategies that I talk about in the program. But I think having making your space not chaotic and making some beauty there and bringing yourself to the task makes a big difference.
I'll just share a really quick thing about beauty. Like yesterday, I was just making like a hot chocolate for my wife and myself for like at around 8 p.m. or something, and I just got some coconut milk and hot water, and I put them in the pot, and then I added some star anise, a little bit of turmeric powder and cinnamon powder and cloves and and cacao powder as well. And I just put them, and they sort of floated on top. And I just stood there looking at them for around like 2 minutes before I could actually physically bring myself to stir them in, because they just looked so nice. And then
that's what I love about you, Fawad.
It was just like a little. It was just so beautiful to look at, and then to know that I was gonna get to eat that as well, and to experience it in a different way other than the visual itself, just to take in the whole food was just like such a beautiful thing to be part of. And I felt so glad to be alive just because I'm making hot chocolate. And this is an experience of that is available to all human beings freely, really. I mean, it costs you nothing more than the ingredients to do it, and it's just wonderful. What else do we look for in life if it's not for those little moments of real connection with being alive? And I think this is the importance of cooking for us, is that this is where we feel alive, because that's where life comes into our being. So I think it's a big thing for people to explore if they haven't, to take in that beauty of being in the kitchen.
Isn't that beautiful?
This is what it's about. And it's like one of the things I want to talk about in the program that I'm doing, and I do talk about, is that we have to make choices in our life as what really matters to us. Because I can tell you, one of the things that I find now as I'm older is that I can tell you that when I'm probably on my deathbed, it's the things that where you interact with life and feel alive are generally probably not the material things that you've achieved.
Yeah.
And this is partly why I'm making a little bit more conscious decisions about the work that I kind of do, that take away from the things or the other experiences I really want to be having. And I think that's, these are none of these, it's like none of these are black and white discussions. The discussion about how we have our food costs or how we go about accruing our budgets or how we spend the money we've got or how we make Whole Foods workable, they're all big conversations really fundamentally around how do we want to live our life. I'm a deep person, I have to tell you, which is a bit much for some people, but
not for us, Jude.
Good, dive deep. But they are. It's like beauty is what alerts us. It feeds our soul.
It does.
And beautiful food, and when food is delicious, and this is where I come back to deliciousness and joy, it's like they are so critical during your week or just to have had that experience makes such a big difference in how you navigate the rest of the week.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Absolutely. We're 1.5 hours into the conversation. I think We can keep going for a couple. Do you have a couple more days available too?
She doesn't. She's a busy lady. I feel bad taking an hour and a half.
Don't. I'm in the midst of working out what I'm actually going to take with me because I hate taking too much luggage. And I've got a few other jobs to finish before I fly out on Wednesday because I'm going to be in Melbourne on the weekend.
Yes, tell our listeners about that. It'll be already happened, won't it? It will be. Yeah, that's okay. We'd still love to know about it.
Look, I think very much I'm doing a seminar with Lisa Corduff in Melbourne, and we'll take it to the other states next year. But it's something I think it's very much where I'm at these days is whole foods, whole lives, whole families.
Yeah.
But where I really am and is one of the things, can I just briefly tell you about the kind of logo for the online program?
Yeah, tell us about the program because we haven't discussed it properly.
I just want to, what I've got when people, because it's not up yet, they won't see it till we start launching it just about the middle of October.
Mm-hmm.
And I love, if the best way to stay updated with stuff that's going on for me is with my newsletter, which is on the homepage of my website. But when that goes up, what the logo is or what the image is that when you get there, it's a quilt. And there's different patches in the quilt. So it's like, those little circles I spoke about. I kind of see it as everybody doing their own little patch. Yeah. And then you put all those patches together and you've formed a really beautiful big quilt.
That's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I can't tell you. It's just such a beautiful quilt already, but that will develop and expand. And I want to get all the classes up there ultimately, but as you know, they take a long time to do.
Sure
but
does.
what I found about doing it is I found that I actually think that with the videos that we've done that people actually get to see more of what's happening and cooking, and it's a more intimate cooking experience than when I do classes.
That's true.
Because they're right there. Have you found that?
Yeah, and you're in their home.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that, and we'll do a lot more of those next year. But the one that I'm starting with is get organised for the week ahead, because that's, I think, where people are really all these issues, like how we bring ourselves to the kitchen, how we make this workable in our busy 2017 lives. And the program is coming from the physical and the spiritual as well, looking at both aspects of the things that we need to do. So I'm super excited to be getting to do that. But it's a lovely medium in which to work. But, yeah, that's my quilt. I'm so excited about the quilt. It's so beautiful.
And where can they find information? Just to go to your website? Do you want to explain?
Well, there's not much information on the website at the moment. In fact, there's really none at the moment for it.
Okay, so just sign up to the newsletter.
Is sign up to the newsletter. It will also be on Insta and Facebook.
Yeah.
And they can follow me there on what I do there. But really for me, haven't got to the point of there will be a whole new website for it. Okay. But that hasn't gone up yet, and you won't see much or you won't see anything on the existing website just yet. So sign up to the newsletter and you'll hear all about it.
And that's at, what's your website URL?
Wholefoodcooking.com.au, is it?
Yeah, wholefoodcooking.com.au.
We can put a link to that as well.
And Jude, you also had a book come out last year, or is it this year?
Sorry?
You had a new cookbook come out. Was it last year?
Got some exciting news. So last year, I did have a new book, and it's very much that kind of where I am now, whole food from the ground up. And that's kind of really, like what I'm very much about, whole food from the ground up. But whole food baking, which came out 2013, which has been out of print for a bit, is being reprinted and it'll be out before Christmas.
Woo!
Awesome.
That's a good book.
It's so exciting.
That book is so full of amazing information. Don't ever think of Jude's cookbooks as just a cookbook. It's like doing a chef course. Whole food chef. It's amazing.
You know what I've discovered? I don't know if you've discovered this. What I've discovered about doing online programs is that you actually don't have an editor editing 2/3 of everything you've written out.
Yeah, that's true. You can just keep blabbing on. Hey,
Keep blabbing on.
Cut that down by 2/3. Oh no.
Yeah.
The hardest thing.
It is the hardest thing.
Oh, good on you. Well, that was amazing. An hour and a half. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to meet all the lovely people, but to be able to talk about something that I really believe in.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing.
What a great first conversation to have with you, and looking forward to so many more in the future, and really to take in your wisdom. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. I've just so loved it and just really enjoyed spending the time with you too, because I love you guys. I've known Joe for quite a while now, and I love what you both do.
Well, we look forward to all getting together sometime. Not this trip to Perth, sadly, because you're going to Sydney while we're going to Perth, but we will catch up sometime.
We most certainly will.
Yeah.
Lots of love, you two.
Lots of love back. Thank you so much.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.